selected a few selected issues about that related to governance, because that is what I do. I'm a lawyer. I work with policy instruments, with laws. And specifically, I'm part of a couple of research programs that one is with big and small Swedish industries, how to move towards circular business models, and legal barriers, other policy barriers for that, so and the drivers. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I also do quite a lot of stuff on product regulation, and we just finalized a 2-year research project with the Virginia Tech in the United States and some various actors on creating a repair society. What would it take to make consumer repairs a big part of the society again, like it used to be? So I'll talk a little bit about that product regulation stuff like that. And apart from the research, we do quite a lot of different outreach, governmental reports. Here are some examples for different organizations. We also have a new report for the European Environmental Bureau that feeds into the process of a new battery regulation at the European Union, because a lot of stuff don't get repaired because it's too expensive or difficult to remove the battery or fix the battery and so on. So we do a lot of stuff where we interview, for instance, repairers and feed this into the policy process. And if you have questions, raise your hands, and Emmanuel will probably tell me as we go along. First of all, I'll spend a few words on what public policy is. Then I go into the critical perspective because, well, I'm a lawyer, so I am a realist, or some people will say cynical. So I'll talk a little bit about why we often have unrealistic expectations on circular economy, and why we need to, have a more realistic view of some things. I then talk a little bit about policy interventions for the circular economy but very briefly before going into it's a big topic, so I'll go into my 2 topics here, circular business models, circular products. And then in the end, I reflect a little bit on the role of citizens in this process. And I don't want to call us consumers, because that's part of the problem, so I call us citizens now. I'll come back to why. And first of all, and this is very crucial to point out, and probably many of you have seen it, you cannot look at circular economy in one policy field and then look at the climate change in another one, because they are more and more interlinked. The circular economy has an enormous climate potential. It's about having longer lasting infrastructure, longer lasting buildings. It's about recycling higher levels of certain materials. It will also have a big climate impact. But also, of course, how all the investments we have in climate infrastructure and technology will require resources. And we can look at this picture to the top right here. I mean, if you look at climate change, then a lot of people think, okay, we have a future, we have the same street, but these are electric cars. The problem then is, of course, we're gonna mine all these metals and minerals somewhere. And the risk is that either we mine them in Congo or in Mongolia or somewhere where there might be a number of social environmental issues, or we have used deep sea bed mining, which is also a number of environmental issues, or we can open more mines in countries here like Sweden. We have quite a few rare earths and uranium or whatever, but then we have to fight with all the farmers and the people owning summer houses and the Samis with the reindeers and so on. So, and the problem is we're gonna need more minerals. We cannot recycle until we build up a fleet of cars. So that's gonna be tricky. And then we might also say, but okay, we can use resource-related policies to support climate and to save resources, but they are dependent, for instance, on chemical policies. So if you look at the bottom left here, if you look at all this plastic here, you can see that these ideas you see in some national circular economy plans that we're going to recycle over 90% of plastic, it's totally unrealistic, because most plastic here, it either contains dangerous chemicals, so you cannot recycle it and use it in new products, or it's ugly, low quality plastic. So what we find often in industry is that there's one small part with a very pure, nice plastic stream that everybody wants, and a big, ugly plastic stream that nobody wants. So this is why you see more and more that the European Commission looks at climate, circular economy, chemical policies as interrelated. You need to address all these things. There can only be a circular economy if it's not too toxic, and you need to have climate and circular economy issues together. Okay, what is public policy? What am I talking about? Well, you know more or less what it means. It's action plans, it's laws, it's policy instruments, it's budgets. How much money do we give to electric car subsidies this year? All kinds of things that the government or at different level does. But it can be national governments, could be regional governments, could be a municipality. But what we're interested in really is policy instruments, and the policy instrument gives you incentives to change behavior. If you are a citizen and you think about, should I buy an electric car? Well, I get a subsidy. That's an economic incentive, a carrot here. It could also be that, as we have noticed lately, that we have a high fuel taxes, and this combined with the situation in Russia, well, we pay a lot for the gas at the gas station. So Sweden has a very high carbon dioxide tax, and that is a way to make people more interested in buying an electric car, because we have much cheaper, we have cheap electricity in Sweden, but expensive fuel. So that is the economic incentive. But then if you look at the computer in front of you, the European Union has lots of rules. What do you have to do to put a computer on the market? And there's rules on the chemicals. You're not allowed to use certain mercury, flame retardants. There's also rules on energy efficiency through the Eco Design Directive. This computer must have a certain energy efficiency standard. So those are the sticks of the regulations. If you have put a computer on the EU market and it doesn't comply with EU rules, the authorities can remove it. Say you're no longer allowed to sell this computer on the market. That is an administrative or regulation. And then we have informative instruments or sermons, and that is, typically ways to make you change behavior. You go into the store, you want to be a good consumer, you see an eco-label product, you buy it. So it's kind of information that can make you change behavior. Or you can go into the store and see this food product has a GMO labeling on it, this genetically modified organism in it, then I don't want to buy it, negative labeling. Okay, so public policy is about all these things, but policy instrument is to change behavior. And typically these policy instruments have been clustered under certain areas of environmental protection. So you have climate and energy as one area, you have circular economy as one area. And circular economy has a little bit, it's a mix of waste and recycling rules, which we had a specific area before. And the difference is, of course, the circular economy is not just about handling waste. Now we want to be wise with our resources, keep them in economic use longer and so on. But we also have product regulations, which I'll talk about today, eco design and so on, as a part of the circular economy. But also we have, new regulations on conflict minerals or microplastics coming in, which could also be part of a circular economy. And then we have all other chemicals, water emissions, and so on. So my message here is that we have different policy areas and we adopt policy instruments under them, but more and more you need to look at them together here. Standards is not exactly a policy, but they're often very important for policy. So for instance, if the European Union says your computer has to have this energy efficiency standard, there must be a standard so the company can show that this is the energy performance of my computer. You have to have a measurement standard. So standards are super important because you need them to comply with regulation. You need to show, okay, my computer does not contain these hazardous chemicals, it holds this efficiency standard and so on. But also different kinds of standards are important because business communicate in international supply chains through standards. And So standards are used to show legal compliance, they're used to communicate in supply chains, and they can support sustainable practice. So an eco-label is a type of standard. And that is good in a way. You communicate it, and the coffee growers somewhere in a poorer country can comply with these standards and get an eco-label. But it could also be a problem for them if you say, you in Europe have 20 different eco-labels for coffee. Okay, I cannot pay for all these certificates. So standards are important in various ways. And eco-labels, and here you have a couple of mandatory ones. The one in the middle with the vacuum cleaner is a mandatory label. You have to put it on your vacuum cleaner. And they also have a number of voluntary ones. And this is, of course, complex, for the companies producing stuff. Which ones are they going to pay for in order to get certificates? So we have policies in different policy areas, and circular economy then is a policy area that comes from waste legislation, from eco-design and product regulation, from conflict minerals, microplastics, stuff like that. Now, when we discuss the circular economy, we need to have a little bit of a reality check. And the first thing you should, I would say, after doing research on policy evaluation for over 20 years is you should give up the idea that you can get very far either in climate or circular economy without public policy. And here is an example of how even the corporations say that, you can forget about getting a circular economy or climate friendly economy without stringent governmental regulations. There was a time, some 15, 20 years ago when companies believed in corporate social responsibility, voluntary stuff hasn't worked. We have the evidence. Voluntariness doesn't take you very far. Of course, there's a few exceptions. There are some voluntary initiatives that work better, but they are at like 2-3%, to be honest. They won't take us very far. And you can say in countries like, okay, but the government doesn't work very well in this country. Maybe we should do something in industry. And that is correct. But we also know that in those countries, the industries don't have a strong driver because the governments cannot push them to do things either. So you won't get very far with voluntariness there either. And that means that the current capitalistic system hasn't delivered for the planet, and it hasn't delivered for people. We see this under the COVID. I mean, we see people in developing countries who moved up to become middle class are now falling back into a poorer situation. We see evidence that in some supply chains, in textiles, for instance, it's the poorest workers who get to bear the burden now for the COVID. Whereas, as we see in certain companies such as Amazon are doing fantastic during COVID times. So, we see the evidence both for the environment, for better sharing of the economic gains. This system doesn't work. And we can look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but also here I would be cautious because, for instance, they say they don't talk about growth in richer countries, but they talk about how the poorest countries should have 7% economic growth, which makes sense. But if you look at the population growth in those countries, so on, it might be totally unrealistic to do that unless we share more of our resources to them. Also, what is often missing, when we talk about circular economy, it's about circular business models, about opportunities. We should remember that resource use imply neo-colonial structures, and that is easy to see. Let's say here in Sweden, we export maybe, 5G system network for mobile operation, or we export an electric truck, right? Those are knowledge-intensive products. What do we import from Indonesia or whatever? Well, it's mining, right? Raw materials. A lot of the resource use today, it reflects the fact that knowledge-intensive products are expensive, whereas raw materials are cheaper. And that means that the countries that makes most of the value added also use most of the world's resources. This is not strange. The Chinese understand that. That's why they have a strong governmental policy to move up the value chain. But if you're a poor country and are just going out to compete on the world market, you don't have much of a chance to do that and move up this value chain. So, and that also means that in some ways poverty is created in the system. It's not a bug. It's how it is. And we can also see that, you know, we have foreign aid from the European Union and from states, and they can try to alleviate poverty, but we also know that they have created poverty. You can go to Africa and say, we used to fish here, but the European Union gave money to this fishing fleet, and now they took all the fish, and now we have to collect firewood for a living, you know. And what I'm bringing this up is that it's clearly that, you know, often when we discuss circular economy, it's about these business opportunities, the circular business models, but we need to remember that underlying this is the current linear and very unfair economy. And the main issue in the future that both climate change and circular economy need to relate to is that our resources and our current carbon budgets are limited. If you look at the Paris Agreement, there's only so much carbon we can emit. And that carbon will be emitted by the richest people unless we look at how we can, you know, distribute resources better. And that is why, you know, you see in the latest reports on sustainable consumption that can we really allow private yachts and jets while some people cannot have a decent standard of living? And this debate will only grow now. Because if you look at the poorest 30% of Europeans today, they don't emit any more carbons than they did 30 years ago. It's the richest part of the population that uses more carbon. All right. The other myth is that consumers can lead the way. No, they cannot. We have also done all the research on this. And billions of consumers cannot go together and demand something different on the market, because we are more like these people to the bottom right here in this wheel here that, you know, I have 3 kids, I have a demanding job, I want to support collection to Ukrainian refugees, but and then when I go to the store, I'm supposed to save the world by having all kinds of information, doing the right thing. That is not how it works. People in Copenhagen, they bike to work because it's safe and quick. You know, it's a great place to bike to work. If you are in some cities around the world and bike to work, you risk your life. You know, it doesn't work. The structure, the economic incentive, the infrastructure, that is what creates opportunities for us to take sustainable choices. And that also means that there's nothing the fossil industry loves more than the idea of you doing something. Rubbish. If we want to get rid of the fossil industry, we need collective action, political action, not 10 billion consumers at the pump doing something. The other thing is, and this is where I sometimes get into conflict with designers, because if you're in engineering and design school, they tell you have all this freedom, you know, you have this freedom to design cool stuff. That is not what I hear. I talk to the designers in industry and they don't say that at all. I talked to, the first quote here is from a cell phone manufacturer. I talked to the design team and they said, we don't have any chance to do anything sustainable. We're competing so hard right now, we cannot take any chances. If you want cell phones to be more sustainable, you have to regulate them. We cannot do anything. We cannot take any risks. And if you see the quote on the bottom, it's from a German study with German designers, and they say, yes, our products don't last as long as we hoped they would, and we all have a lot of this, you know, something wrong with the car, we have to take them back and fix them. And why is that? It's not because of our design, it's because that the management put the cost pressure on us, you know, you have to sell the car at this price. It's because many products get more complex with new features, you know, it could be a fridge and freezer with an extra ice machine or whatever, you know, more stuff on it and not much time to test it because we have to give it to the market. Of course, things break down, you know. And that means that for a few manufacturers like Miele, okay, maybe you can sell a very expensive and very high quality washing machine, but for most manufacturers it's a systemic process. You cannot, as an individual designer, decide to all of a sudden design an expensive long-lived product. It doesn't work like that. Okay, so as you see, I come from this perspective that what works, we have the evidence. And as researchers, and also I stress to my students, we have to look at the evidence and what works and doesn't work. And also among researchers today, there's too much wishful thinking. You know, you have this new products or this circular business model, but we have to look, what is the potential really? Is there potential, and so on. There's a lot of circular business models that have very little environmental potential, for instance. Okay. Are there any questions yet, Manuel, or should I just keep going?
Not yet. We haven't any question in the chat. You can keep going. We're gonna ask questions at the end. Sure, okay. Because I have one.
Okay, so that was the big thing about the circular economy, and then we should remember also the internal conflicts within the circular economy. And here's an example we have in Sweden right now. What is a circular building, you know? And you know, in Sweden we have a lot of forest land, and forests are regenerative, they grow again. So a lot of life cycle assessments show that building in wood is a pretty good idea. You know, we keep the carbon in the structure, we regenerate the forest. That looks pretty good. And we have a tradition of wood building. And also wood building is beneficial because you can do most of it indoors in the winter and put it together quick. So it provides for modular. So it's a lot of lean manufacturing opportunities. So, okay, wood building is good. But then you can come from the other perspective and say, if you want to make a building that really lasts a long time, maybe we should use other material. You know, it's a durable building, lasts for hundreds of years. And then you might want to promote other materials. And then we have also, of course, the recycling, you know, option. That the idea is we build a building. The important thing is we don't mix this stuff up. We can actually reuse and recycle more. And I'm showing this to show that there's no settled evidence in this. So what we're doing is a bit of everything right now. We're thinking, should we do a more modular building? Should we use wood? Should we use other material? So even within the circular economy, there's no often like different aspects of circularity can come into conflict, and it's not easy to know what is best. And then you have to try different things and see what seems to be a good sustainable solution. All right. Then how do we get a circular economy? I claim that we need governmental policies to get there. And just let me take a detour to the climate, because in many ways, climate change policy is a couple of decennia, 20 years ahead of circular economy policy. And if you look at the European Union, of course, we have a target for greenhouse gas emissions that is being negotiated now to be raised. We also have targets that support this, one on renewable energy, how much our renewables must increase. We have also energy efficiency targets that support it. So the interesting thing with climate is we have 3 of these overall binding targets. If we now compare this to circular economy, we don't have any binding targets. We don't have a binding targets on resource use. We don't have a binding targets of resource use per unit of GDP or something like that. We don't have any binding targets. What the European Commission have are some indicators. So this is a big difference with the climate change. We have binding targets, which will steer the economy to some extent here also. And I would argue we need also binding targets for the circular economy, because how can we otherwise measure any progress or go to more stricter policies? We only have indicators so far. Where we do have targets is in waste policy. And I remember the 1970s. Probably you don't. Probably you also, Manuel, are a bit younger than me, so you don't remember the 1970s. But I do. I was born 71. And I remember that there was half an hour of kids' TV on TV, black and white, and that was all there was. The rest of the, no computers, nothing. So you had to find something to do. And sometimes we went to the landfill, you know. That was the other weird thing about the 1970s. Nothing was locked, so kids could run around wherever. We went into construction sites, to landfills. Okay, so today, if you would look for a landfill in Sweden, you wouldn't find it. Not that kids need that kind of entertainment anymore, but anyway, because we got rid of the landfills. So you go to countries like Germany and Sweden, we don't have any landfills left. So, and how did this happen? This development you see for Sweden here, where we have more material recycling, more biological treatment like bio waste going to cars as fuel, and where we use a lot of district heating. So we burn the waste for heating our buildings. Well, it's partly because in, for instance, producer responsibility rules, there's a mandate. You have to recycle packaging, cars, electronics. So you raise the recycling levels. You have to do energy recovery of the rest, for instance. But we also had taxes on landfill. So it becomes uneconomical to landfill. So in waste policy that we have worked with a longer time, there we have actually seen something change. But the problem is, from a circular economy perspective, is that you see that the waste levels always goes up. You see it's a dip under the economic recession there, 2010, but generally they go up, right? And this is why we need a circular economy, because all these waste policy have not managed to reduce the waste levels. And in order to do that, we need to keep products and materials in use longer, so they don't go into this quick cycle of, yes, we recycle something, but it's still a very short lifespan of it. And this is one of the key things then in the circular economy. If you ask Swedes, what would you like to do for the environment? They say, I like to recycle, you know, we like to recycle. Yeah, they say it's not good enough anymore. Recycling is the last option. We want you to buy higher quality products and use them longer. We want you to repair them. We want you to use stuff longer. So recycling is not good enough anymore. So we taught people recycling is great, and now we want to tell them, no, it's not so great. Do other stuff. Okay, now, in order to change our current economy to a circular economy, we need a lot of policies, and I cannot talk about all of them today. And I have a figure from the first circular economy action plan. There's a second action plan, but we haven't made a figure on that. So I'll show this one, and it gives you an idea. On the production side, we need better product design, but we also need better product processes, industrial symbiosis, less waste, using waste products into new processes, stuff like that. On the consumption side, we need people to buy different kinds of products with recycled content, products that last longer, etc. I'll come back a little bit to the consumer side. We need improved waste management also, so we can kickstart the second-hand market and the waste market. So for instance, as I said before, we collect a lot of used plastic stuff, but there's not a great market. No one wants ugly plastics. So if we want to kickstart such markets, we need to work with certification, pure materials, stuff like that. Otherwise, we just continue to collect ugly plastics, but we cannot use them. No one wants them on the market. And then we also need support, innovation, investment, loans to circular companies and other stuff. Okay. I'm just checking how I'm doing time-wise. Well, so I will dig deep into two different things here. The first one is the circular business models. They can be very different. In a country like Sweden, we think, okay, we can build in wood, we can make future textiles out of Swedish wood, so we can avoid all the big problems with cotton, for instance. Okay, that's the bioeconomy. I don't work so much with that. I work more with manufacturing. So here we think of business models such as Miele selling these white goods that last 30 years, or we think of companies that recondition old furniture and sell them as new, or we think about this big machinery parts here, motor parts, or maybe even bigger heavy machinery that you remanufacture and so on. So any business model that does something like this here, reuse, remanufacture, recycle, those are circular business models. And then we see they are quite different, relating to different products, business to business, business to consumer. And they could be recycling, they could be reuse, could be longer lived products. How do we support them then? And what do they want? Well, first of all, they all want some things. We see that when we look at the sectors, we have interviewed them, they all want leadership and targets. So they all want the public sector to have circular economy targets to lead the way. They all want public procurement. So if a company sells reconditioned furniture, the biggest way for them to scale up is that the Swedish government buy reconditioned furniture. And that is actually happening right now. The Swedish governmental and agencies and municipalities are buying more and more reconditioned furniture. So that business is scaling up quickly. The Swedish healthcare sector buying a lot of bio-based plastic products instead of fossil-based plastic products. So public procurement is something they all want. They say, okay, we have a niche market, bio-based plastic, reconditioned furniture. If you want us to scale up this niche to a bigger business, use public procurement, public contracts. In Sweden, public procurement is 30% of GDP. It's a big, we have a high tax and a lot of high level procurement. So they want leadership, public procurement, national targets. And then it's a little bit different what they want in some sectors. And I can just provide an example of the building sector. They want this material passport, pre-auditing with selected demolitions. So instead of today that, you know, use, like you just tear down a building and you cannot use anything because it's ugly and it's mixed. They want it to be pure streams, which will cost money, of course, but then you can reuse and recycle more. And then there's a bunch of other policies. So just to make one example, some Swedish municipalities have now taken like a policy decision, they will support wood-based building as the priority. So you also have some local policies. So if you look at these business models, they all have specific barriers. And the typical barrier is, for instance, that waste policy or waste transport rules means we cannot remanufacture recycled stuff. And they all want slightly different policy interventions to go forward. And you can put it also like this. If you are a company that are a niche, that do something new, such as recondition furniture, have a new type of purer product like bio-based plastic or wood building or something, you want market formation support, and that is typically public procurement. If you want to work with product reuse, remanufacturing, you want policies that support circular activities. And the typical example here is that I want to repair my product in Poland if it breaks down in Sweden because it's cheaper, but the rules on transport of waste makes this difficult. It's too complex rules for transporting this stuff and so on. So, and the same, Volvo wants to remanufacture electric the trucks, and often they say, okay, it's a lot of rules on trade and investment that makes it hard to take them back and so on. So, you know, there's always kind of rules in the way. So we all the time say we need to change these rules. If I talk to a recycling company in Sweden, they say it's allowed to recycle this stuff in Kaunas, but not in Vilnius, because the municipalities have different rules, you know. So Vilnius says no, and Kaunas says yes, very common, you know. So you, and then you might also talk to companies and say, you know what, the problem is that people choose cheap, crappy products. You need to regulate. So we only sell high quality products in Europe. Now, strategy number 3 here, do more choice editing. And this is where we're moving now. More and more, the policymakers in Europe are saying, you know what, we're not going to allow these cheap products on the market. We choice edit for you. Okay, I need to speed up here. And then we looked a lot of product policies. What are the policies we can use to promote longer lifetimes and repairability that supports longer lifetimes? And here we see a lot of standards coming up right now. And I call it the 4th generation because we already have policies on chemicals in products, on producer responsibility, collecting recycling products, and on energy efficiency of products. So what we have right now is a lot of new policies at the EU level, at national levels, at regional, local levels to support longer lifetimes. And I will not go through them all here today because you probably already have an information overload, but let me give a few examples. So in the European Union, you have eco-design regulations now on right to repair. And that means that the manufacturers must make spare parts and manuals and tools available to independent repairers. So they can no longer control the repair networks and say you're only allowed to go to these repairers. They have to support other independent repairers. And to some extent also make certain parts available to consumers, but not the electric parts here. And there's also criteria coming in green public procurement that you can put in your procurement that the products have to be repairable and so on. And then you have, as you might have seen, the French repairability index that you have to, for certain product categories, you have to put in 5 categories information on how repairable your product is. In Sweden, we have reduced the VAT, the tax for repair sectors and so on. And in France, they're now introducing kind of a repair funds so that the producers have to pay a part of the repair costs. What we're also likely to see in the near future is that what we have now is an energy label. If you ever bought a white good, you probably looked at it, or a TV. It's quite likely in the near future we will have a durability indicator for this product and a repairability score when you buy a product. And we believe that consumers will then take these aspects into consideration more in the future when they buy something. And then what a lot of European countries have done is to change the consumer guarantee rules for the mandatory guarantee that you have. We don't have any evaluation on how that has worked yet, but several countries have said instead of a 1-year or 2-year warranty, you have a longer warranty period. And what is also under a lot of fight is this burden of proof, because usually when you buy a product in most countries, for the first 6 months, if something goes wrong, it's the seller has to show there was something wrong with the product. But after 6 months, it's you have to show that there was something wrong with the product. So the burden of proof is as important as the legal warranty period. Okay, and this French repair fund is interesting because when you buy a product, well, first the seller has a legal guarantee. And often if you buy a white good, they offer like a 3-year commercial warranty. What the French want to do is to say that, you know, if you have to repair your product within a certain time period, the manufacturer has to pay part of the repair costs. So to provide incentives to not produce products that has to be repaired. And then you also have the fee. When you put your product on the market, you have to pay a fee so it will be recycled one day at the end of life stage. So from a from a manufacturer perspective, you have a lot of different obligations here in the life cycle of products, and these are only increasing now. And then, of course, at the local level, you have a lot of going on with sharing initiatives, with reuse centers. Sweden, this is really scaling up quickly, with also specific reuse centers for build construction products, stuff like that. It might be the same in Lithuania and so on, I'm not sure. Okay, now you probably have an information overload, but Manuel said you were a knowledgeable audience, so I'm sure you could handle this. Final thing to bring up is consumer then, consumer perspectives. I see I'm a little bit over time, so I'll speed up. And I don't call them consumers because that is part of the problem. We consume stuff, we think of consumption as a linear activity. We want people to take different roles for the circular economy. And the first thing is, okay, if I buy something, buy high quality, durable, repairable products. Secondhand is trendy in Sweden, partly because our ancestors bought durable products. If they bought cheap stuff, there wouldn't be a secondhand today. So unless you buy quality, there's no, you know, there's no need to repair or remanufacture crap products. There has to be quality from the beginning. Once you own a product, you need to take care of it. Avoid replacing it if it works, maintain it properly, update it properly. A lot of white goods today that you find in recycling could have lived longer if you had taken care of them. Often it's clogged pipes, stuff like that. If you have maintained stuff properly, they would not have died. But that also shows the problem of the linear economy. They sell you a white good, but they don't sell maintenance, right? So a lot of stuff could have lived several years longer if you had taken care of it. And then, of course, repair instead of buying new. And this is a problem we have here. It might be slightly better in Lithuania, I don't know, but in Nordic countries, we don't repair much because we have money, right? So, especially Norwegians and others, lots of money, just buy something new. People cannot wait. Even for a dishwasher, people I don't want to wait a week, you know, get a new dishwasher. That has to change. And then, of course, if you give something away, don't give it to recycling. There might be someone else who can remanufacture or use this product. And to the extent that it works for you, be a sharer instead of a buyer. You know, take part in the sharing economy when this makes sense. And there are two implications of this. To the left, you see here, okay, we live in a democracy with a free market. We cannot force people to do this, right? We're not the Soviet Union. We cannot force people. That means that some people may want to buy, you know, it's very hard to make them to share. Fine, you know. But having said that, to the right here, I said the roles are not equal, you know. And that means it has to hurt more. In the future, if you want to be more linear, it has to hurt more. We have to make it more expensive and difficult to buy new. We have to make it cheaper to repair, for instance. So we need to steer harder here. We need to say more painful to be circular, more attractive to become circular here. And this is what we're doing with these different policy interventions, but we have to probably steer a much harder in the future, because we also have an obligation in our countries not to use too much of the world's resources, because then it won't be anything left for the poorer people. So we need to keep our resources in better use, not be linear, not buy new all the time, etc. And also the final point here, consumers are unreliable. You know, if you ask most consumers, they will tell you, I want high quality products, right? And they say that, but do they want to pay for them? Well, they're not used to it, right? If I buy this Miele dishwasher for 2,000 euros, it costs 4 times the usually. I mean, you're not used to paying that kind of money. So you may want the quality of the Miele, but you're not used to paying for it. So we cannot rely on consumers to. Instead, a lot of consumers, as you know, they buy lots of cheap crap. You know, they buy lots of cheap clothes, instead of spending more money on quality products. So what we think is that consumers generally have a poor idea of the total cost of ownership. If they do, they would buy more quality. And if we now provide more information to consumers, they will probably become more aware of this and hopefully buy more quality in the future. But having said that, I also think we need to do this choice editing. In the future market, there won't be much space for short-lived, low-quality products. We have to regulate them away. We have to say, in Europe, you only sell high-quality stuff. And then you open up this debate, yeah, but what about poor people? Can they afford it? But the truth is that they also need quality stuff. They can use installment contracts, or they can lease stuff. They can buy secondhand, but I don't think that's a good objections. They also want quality stuff, basically. All right, so I'll stop there. Sorry if I pull over time, but we need policies to go forward and look at other aspects of the circular economy, fairness perspectives. And I think if we know how many researchers here, we should also be careful, because we do a lot of case studies that, looking at circular business models, but usually it's only some of these that has any potential. So we also need to be critical about what we do, where is the potential and so on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carl. It was a really interesting and insightful talk. I think that we will have many questions, and the discussion will be open. Me personally, I have a couple of them, but I will open the floor for participants. If you have any question, you can unmute yourself and ask directly, or you can write in the chat as you feel. Someone there? Well, I will ask my first question just to give them time to think about the discussion. I was really happy to hear about this durability regulatory issue and this tension that sometimes raised. I also was aware of this durability tagging in France, that France is now pushing forward. But I also hear about this tension between mandatory and voluntary. Because, for example, in France, this could be made because they have a bigger market, for example, and those can be, the cost of these regulations can be afforded. And for smaller economies, like, for example, in Sweden or Lithuania, for example, this could be a bit harder to turn it into a mandatory regulation. What do you think? How to deal with that issue?
That is entirely correct. First of all, like you said, France is big enough to maybe make, so we work a bit with IKEA and they say France is big enough, it makes a difference. But the European Commissions have signaled that they want to maybe overtake this repairability and durability index, because they are worried that Spain and France have their own. So I think we will see now in the coming years that they're going to propose it at the European level, because the manufacturers are very worried that France has their own index, and now Spain talks about their own mandatory repairability index. So what's going to happen, it's going to come at the European level. And I think even the French people I talk to agree. They say it would be better to have it European level. So the French is a way of pushing this, I think, to the European level. And Sweden is interesting because, yes, we are too small to have a mandatory index. Right now, we're working with some Nordic companies that actually want more like a eco-label or certificate to show that they have durable products. So we work, for instance, with one company that offer a 10-year warranty on the product. And we cannot regulate this here, but they would also be interested in some kind of third-party certification to show independently that they have a better product on the market, basically. But you're right, exactly. The small countries cannot influence. But even in France, the European Commission will want to put this at the EU level. And next week, this Sustainable Products Initiative comes from the European Commission. And we already know that they're going to signal that they're going to take over this process, I think.
Oh, interesting. So next week they are going to start.
Yeah, I think we'll see it.
And my second question here is because we have realized, or we're aware that some improvements in environmental regulations, for example, CO2 reductions in the consumption of some economies, like for example the Nordic countries, but in some specific case, for example, in textiles, some of those improvements have been externalized to other countries that have not stringent policies. For example, I mean, in the textiles, the cotton, sometimes it's imported from other countries that have not environmental policies as stringent as in Sweden. So
yeah.
in that case, what can we do? What kind of policies can we implement to avoid this kind of tendency?
Good point. If you look at Sweden, our imported carbon emissions are equal to our domestic. So we have been very good at addressing the domestic ones. You know, we have 98% renewables in the electricity mix, for instance, right? So it's only transport left now to deal with in the domestic, but instead like you said, we import loads of textiles, sports gear, electronics, where the carbon emissions are in Asia especially. And actually in Sweden, that is about equal to our domestic emissions. What you can do, well, Sweden is one of the few countries who agreed to have a carbon target that included imported emissions. So this is something we try to get other countries to have as a target to start with. But then we get into the tricky issue what to do about it, because we cannot regulate stuff going on in China, for instance. So we're dependent on their production processes improving. But what we can do, we said, is exactly what we talked about today: buying higher quality, using products longer. So instead of buying too cheap stuff from China, we buy one expensive, right? So that is something we can do, at least to support and also reuse remanufacturing stuff that keeps them in the economy longer. So we get away from this linear cheap imported stuff all the time, basically. But it's very political, and that's going to come up in the Stockholm Plus 50 conference, I think, as a theme later this year, because consumption, it's coming up very clearly in the environmental governance now, who consumes what, and also this distribution perspective, but also imported emissions, that we cannot just look at carbon emissions from the country, we also have to look at imported emissions. Yeah, good question. Tricky stuff.
Thank you very much,
Very political stuff.
Yeah, hard to find a good policy that cover all those issues.
Good luck with that.
Somebody in the audience have another question that want to raise to Carl. We have still 1 or 2 minutes left. No. Otherwise, I want to thank you very much, Carl, for this really interesting and fruitful discussion. It's a topic that it's really promising, and I think that, as you just said, we are aware currently that the efforts needs to be supported by governmental action and collective action. We cannot let everything to market. We have evidence that this will not work as it hasn't worked in the past. So thank you so much for participating in this webinar. And very looking forward to collaborate in further projects with you and with the institute.
Sounds
Thank you
good.
very much.
Thanks for the invitation. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Carl. Have a good weekend. Bye.